And welcome back to our show. Food insecurity will be a defining moment of our time. When we talk about COVID-19, it certainly exacerbated the number of food insecure households, and policy intervention is needed immediately. The think tank and the Thinkubator recently released a policy brief on holiday food insecurity in the Bronx. Now, the report explores the devastating impact COVID-19 has on the Bronx, as well as hunger. The report also amplifies other reports, coining the Bronx as the new face of hunger. It released data on food insecurity during the holiday from nearly 100 Bronx residents representing all zip codes of the borough. Here to provide more information is the Thinkubator's founder and CEO, Dr. Edward Summers. And Dr. Summers, good to have you back with us.
It's good to be here. It's good to be here to talk about this really important issue that's impacting our community.
Yeah, and when we talk about food insecurity, obviously for many people during this holiday time, you talk about giving gifts. Usually gifts is what we give at Christmas. The reality is that forget gift giving. Many people are just struggling to put food in the refrigerator, and that in itself is almost a gift.
Yeah, you touched upon one of the reasons why we decided to do this survey. We conducted the survey prior to Thanksgiving, and what I noticed just in being a Bronx resident, that around Thanksgiving time, we always have these big drives, turkey drives, and you hear about these turkey drives all across the news. And then when Christmas comes, you hear about the toy drives. And every so often you hear about some organizations doing a toy drive and can't drive together. But for Christmas, you mostly hear about these toy drives. And I do think, Christmas is about the kids, right? Let's celebrate, let's give them gifts. But the biggest gift in this year in particular, and in previous years, but this year in particular, is food. That's the gift that is critically important for so many lives in the Bronx and all throughout New York City. There was a report released that there's something like 1.1 million families throughout New York City that are food insecure, that don't have access to adequate meal per day. And so we have a huge problem exacerbated by COVID-19, the health impact, but then the economic impact as well, with people losing jobs during COVID-19. So the best gift you can give during this time is giving family a meal or meals to get them through this holiday season.
And when we talk about your report, obviously it takes a look at a lot of zip codes across the borough. Talk to us about, are there any particular zip codes that stood out and anything that really surprised you there?
Yeah, so the South Bronx continues to be the community that lags around. But what our report looked at was, as you indicated, all the zip codes throughout the borough. And what we're finding is that while the South Bronx is still the most neediest, we saw a need throughout all zip codes throughout the borough. So even up in, Riverdale, where most people think it's Riverdale, it's not really the Bronx. It is the Bronx, and they do have households that are food insecure in Riverdale. During the height of COVID-19, the Thinkubator, formerly the Bronx Private Industry Council, worked with the Bronx Community Relief Effort and a number of churches in Riverdale to support those most needy in that particular community. So what was shocking to me, quite frankly, is that the need was all over New York City, unlike what we normally expected to only be concentrated in the South Bronx. So that was very challenging. And then what's even more challenging is thinking about children. There's something like 17 million children throughout the United States that are food insecure. And we see that all throughout the Bronx, and we see that in our programming as well. As the Thinkubator, we've hosted programs throughout this past several months. And in talking to our young people, we noticed that food it's a challenge for them and their families, their friends. And so that was really startling, the number of food insecure young people who are hungry. So it's a challenge in our community.
I want to look at some of the numbers that came off of your report here, and I have them here in front of me. A report says about 84% of the respondents actually said they'll spend the holidays at home. Nearly 50% of respondents said that they don't know where they would find financial resources to pay for a holiday meal. 39% stated that items such as turkeys and side food items would be helpful during the holiday time. And 52% of your respondents said that they like additional meals from programs such as World Central Kitchen Direct. or other programs that deliver prepared meals to residents, such as New York City's Get Food program. I guess the question that I probably ask you is that, given the fact that you see these numbers, have we ever seen numbers like this in the borough of the Bronx before? Or have you ever, in your time, seen the Bronx in such a dire place where hunger is a major priority?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I would go back to the 80s. I'm a child of the 80s, and I remember growing up, the Bronx was still burning in the 80s. And I do remember, there being lines and lines and lines around churches and community centers in the Bronx, trying to get food, particularly around the holiday time. I still remember growing up as a youth where we would get these big block cheese, the cheese that, you go to the deli and they cut up for you. We would get that big block cheese, we would get pasta and canned goods and such. And I remember hunger being so huge back then. And I think in the case of the Bronx, hunger has been an issue even prior to COVID-19, right? So in 2019, Hunger Free America released a report that indicated that something like 260,000 residents in the Bronx went without adequate meals per day. And so, so I've seen it in the 80s. There was this report that Hunger Free America did, and they released in November of 2019 that indicated that, food insecurity has been an issue. But I think, this COVID-19 and its impact on the job market has exacerbated this so high. And it's looking like the numbers back when I was a kid in the 1980s, when everybody in the Bronx, literally everybody was on the food line. You were waiting for hours and hours with your mom or your abuela or your grandpa, just waiting for the food. And it feels like that 1980s moment when I was growing up, back when the Bronx was very desolate and didn't have much here. It feels like that moment right now in this time.
Yeah, I can relate. As a matter of fact, I told my church on Sunday, I said that, I remember that, standing online with my mother or standing online for my mother and my father. And that cheese, I said that cheese was very hard, but the cheese was real good. We called it the block cheese. You're absolutely right. But that made some of the best macaroni and cheese, brother. Don't you ever be fooled. That block cheese was the thing. Talk to me a little bit about where you go from here. Obviously, you have the report, you have these numbers, you have the findings. Where do you go from here?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And the report produces 4 policy recommendations. One, first and foremost, is making sure that as COVID-19 continues to ravish our land, to make sure that we're continuing to think about safety at locations that are serving food and are giving out pantry items. So that's number one, is just making sure that we take care of the basics of making sure that locations are clean and, and that we mitigate any potential transmission of the virus. And so just making sure that folks understand that and that we provide resources to those giving out food. So the second would be the K through 12 program, the program that our schools have in place where you can actually go and pick up a meal at a lot of our schools. And quite frankly, the rules are pretty liberal in that almost anyone could go there and pick up meals. I think that when we think about the providers that are providing these meals, I think it's critically important to think about that. And in the marketing of this program. Right now, that program isn't largely marketed. It was marketed during the height of COVID and the beginning parts of COVID back in March and April, that you can go to schools and pick up meals. I don't think that people in the community necessarily know that, but I think also what needs to be taken into account is making sure that the DOE looks at their partners, their vendor partners, to make sure that they're having partners that are responsible, that are culturally aware of the communities that they're serving, and making sure that they're providing meals that speaks to the culture and respective communities. Because despite people being poor, taste matters. People's tastes are real.
Right.
People want to be just treated with dignity and respect. And so instead of that peanut butter and jelly sandwich that you're going to serve a family, how about you serve them, a grilled chicken with a vegetable, and that's a healthy option, right? Right. So it's just thinking through that program, making sure it's marketed, but also thinking through the vendors that are part of that program. The third item that the report suggested was there's that benefit that many people don't know about, that young people have that are enrolled in school. It's the food stamp benefit or the public assistance benefit. And not many young people and their families know that there's these cards that were given out during the beginning of COVID, that the legislation has been extended to September of 2021. So it's something like a couple of $100 extra of food stamps that are available to young people who are in schools for them and their families. And so that's another resource that's really important. And we just need to make sure that the community knows about it. We did a study of our young people in our programs, and they didn't know about the program. And this is a critical program that can support families and provide additional assistance. And then last, the report talks about really looking at these different food delivery programs like World Central Kitchen and New York City's Get Food. And it starts to think about other programs out there and other mechanism options to support particularly seniors, but those who may have medical conditions, thinking about how do we innovate in those programs? How do we just flip those programs upside down, particularly as we're still dealing and battling with COVID? Yes, the vaccine here, but it's not going to get to certain communities for the next year or so. So how do we continue to think about the mitigating a potential transmission? So it thinks about like, how do we think about Uber Eats? It thinks about Postmates and DoorDash, and how do people who are on public assistance can utilize those apps potentially. Maybe it's not using the app, because if I'm an elderly person, 65, 70 years old, I probably don't know how to use an app. But perhaps there's some innovative methods that we can call in, or your elderly person could call in, and that gets transmitted to the app, and they get place an order that gets delivered to their home. So now we're not only advocating for pre-prepared meals, but we're advocating for grocery bags as well to be delivered to homes. And what we think is important here is allowing seniors and other vulnerable populations to be able to use their public assistance benefits for these programs. Right now, if I wanted to order from Uber Eats, I can't use my public assistance card. But what we're advocating for is that we should think about talking to these vendors about how do we open their services up to allow people in vulnerable populations, such as seniors, such as people with pre-existing health conditions, to be able to order from those programs. Because what it does too is it saves our families, right? It reduces the potential risk of the transmission of the virus, right? It allows seniors to truly stay home, order pre-prepared meals if they want, order groceries if they want, use any public assistance benefits that they may have to be able to do that as well. And so it makes it a lot more accessible. These are some of the things that we've been toying around with, or just ideas that will improve the way in which we get food to vulnerable communities. And then, last I would say is give. You can never stop giving resources to organizations that are fighting hunger. I know we work really closely with World Central Kitchen to reduce, those vulnerable households who feel food insecure. But the more we give to these organizations, such as the Thinkubator, World Central Kitchen, such as the Bronx Community Relief Effort, it would go a long way in making sure that we're taking care of those in our community.
Right. Is there a way to break down the amount of people when you talk about this food insecurity? Because what were we looking like pre-COVID versus post-COVID? Because pre-COVID there was a need, but I know post-COVID definitely, as we say, need exacerbated.
Sure. So pre-COVID, there were about 260,000 households in the Bronx that were food insecure. So, there's been numbers that have been produced all over. I don't think we have a definitive number, but we know prior to COVID, there were about 260 households. We think right now, based on the number of households who have applied for different social assistance programs or public welfare benefits, we think that number is probably about 600,000 families or households who are food insecure now. So almost nearly doubling what it was prior to COVID. And this is correlated with, at one time in the Bronx, we had an unemployment rate of about 25%. We're now at about 17%, but this does not account for the closed market, the market that people work off the books, right? So it does not necessarily account for that number. So while we're at 17 at the formal number, we're probably still at 25% with those who don't have formal employment, who work off the books, and who work in an informal economy. So we think that the need has doubled since 2019 during COVID-19, and it's of course correlated with our economy and the job market.
Yeah. So as these numbers are put together, obviously a lot of hard work was gone into it. How long did it take you to compile this report and put it together?
Sure. So we started this report early November, and we concluded it about a week ago. We got a final data in that we felt good about the data, and we felt like it was a representative sample of the Bronx. So it took a little over a month or so to do. We had produced a previous report, food insecurity, back in, I think, September or October. So this really builds off of that work, and it builds off of just our what we're seeing in our community, what we're seeing amongst our young people as well. And so it's been sort of a theme of many of the reports that Think Tank had done. So we did a food insecurity report, I think, in October. Prior to that, we did a report on the impact of COVID-19 on young people. And one of the major things that young people indicated was that they were concerned about food and water, and having access to those. And so we've just been seeing this theme around food, and the need to best support our community. And so it's been for this particular report a little over a month, but it's been a theme of our work throughout the last couple of months.
Yeah, Dr. Ed Summers, we're going to leave it there, but we thank you so much for joining us here on the show, and certainly continue the great work of helping those in need. And as we look around during this time, a lot of people are in need in the borough of the Bronx, but at least you've got your finger on the pulse. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
All righty. Dr. Edward Summers, our guest here on the Social Justice Forum. We want you to stay with us. We do have more show coming up. We'll be right back right after this.